So, Dmitri Tymoczko, thank you so much for being with us and for agreeing to speak to us at the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Well, so we wanted to take advantage of you being in Coimbra for the Mathematics and Computation in Music conference, and we'd just like to talk with you a little bit about the work you do, a little bit of your academic and artistic path, and especially considering that we are a Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, and you being, you're wearing multiple hats, the composer, performer, you also have training in philosophy, mathematics, and so I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, how do you see yourself, and where you're coming from.
Sure. I grew up doing music, but I don't think I'm a natural musician. Some people speak the language of music very fluently, whereas I think I learned music as a second language. And so I'm always thinking about what it means to make music. And for me, I'm naturally a intellectual person or a person who wants to figure out how things work. And so I ended up being someone who both does music, but also thinks about how music works. And you very generously listed all of these different things I do. The one thing I would add to it that is new now is programming, where I'm using computers and doing computer programming for a considerable amount of my time. Mm-hmm. I would say I got into this business because I think that 20th century composers sort of faced a really difficult question, which was how to write music when you distrusted the traditions and the conventions of the earlier century. So I think a lot of 20th century composers thought a lot about music in an interdisciplinary way.
Interesting. Just a moment ago, you were telling us a little bit about how traditions, especially in the American academia, have been trying to be freeing themselves from certain, how they say, gridlocks or whatever, conceptual gridlocks and also artistic gridlocks. And can you tell us a little bit about how your path, you're a famous professor at Princeton, but can you tell us a little bit about how your path influenced the way you think, influenced the way you are currently?
Well, I mean, everybody wanders along their own crooked path. In my case, I played guitar when I started by playing classical piano, but I never really liked classical piano, partly because nobody ever told me how the music works. So they just said, press these keys now. And they didn't really say anything about why the different notes had different meanings. So I switched to guitar, and I was really interested in the more experimental or intellectual sides of popular music. And then I got to college, and I decided, I've always been a good student. But when I went to college, I decided I didn't want to do math or science or physics. I loved music. I realized when I was a senior in high school that I had spent all this time in calculus class learning how to find the slope of a curve, and I never wanted to find the slope of a curve, whereas I liked playing my guitar. And then I got to college, and the music that my teachers cared about and loved was totally different from the music that I cared about. And that began, I think, a lifetime of trying to figure out how to resolve this dissonance between the music that was celebrated academically and the music that really made me feel happy. And I think that got me, that's ultimately been the question that has guided the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about, because you've been at, Berkeley, Oxford, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And now you're at Princeton. Can you tell us a bit about how do you think you combine all of these different hats? How is your research interdisciplinary? There's math, there's philosophy, there's programming.
That's a great question. That? Yeah, I think maybe the philosophy is the secret key that underlies it all. It's not so obvious. A lot of my work, if you look at it, you can see the music, you can see the math, but I think that, my father was a philosopher. I was a philosophy graduate student for a while. My wife is a very well-known philosopher. I think that I have a powerful desire first to understand why things are the way they are. But I think the other important part of philosophy is the search for meaning and really wanting to have a meaningful life and maybe caring less about doing what is expected and more about following your own inner God. So that's a theme in philosophy from Socrates. And so I do think that maybe one of the things I'm good at is, everyone inherits ideas and techniques and assumptions, and one of the things that I'm good at is re-examining those assumptions and those inherited ideas and asking, are these really the ones that are right for me?
Right. Good. So maybe just wrapping up, just maybe a final question. That would be, the idea of future prospects, the idea of where do you think your research has been, what has achieved, how are you looking forward to that? But I'd like to add, because you just mentioned as well, the aspect of meaning, and that has also to do with the way you think of yourself, or what's your context in your present time, but also society, with all of the amazing challenges we're living. So I'm just wondering first if this question of future prospects for you, do you keep your research at the musicological music level separate from the big challenges of the world, or somehow you think the way forward in research should incorporate, I don't know, I'm just wondering, themes like climate change and things like that you would in some way inform directly or indirectly research? That's
a unfortunately good question. I guess being totally honest, I have to say that I am very pessimistic about the future. I think that in the last 10 years, I graduated from college in a very optimistic time. The Soviet Union had fallen. Climate change wasn't as big a concern. The rise of Trump and the right wing across the world, it makes me very depressed. I also see an evolution on the part of younger people to caring more about money and more about maybe materialistic goals and less about meaning. I feel like I am at an age where it's difficult for me to think, if I write a string quartet about climate change, that's not realistically going to make a very great difference in the world. I think that if I were a younger person now, I would not go into music because I think there are bigger challenges. I would say that the way I deal with this issue in my own heart is just to try to do the best work that I can, in the hopes that when the world gets to be in a better place, if it ever does, someone might pick up my book or pick up a record I made and experience a sense of communication and of, understanding that is ultimately what makes life worthwhile. I remember when I was thinking about being a musician, I was thinking, maybe I should try to work on the problem of poverty or work on this problem or work on that. And I remember thinking, imagine we solve all of humanity's problems. What then, right? We don't just want to play cards or play video games. There's still this question of making meaning for yourself and making life meaningful, even after all the starving people are fed and so on. And so at the time, I felt comfortable saying, that's what I want to do with myself. I think it's getting harder and harder as we have to contemplate the idea that the United States might become a fascist country or humanity might, go extinct.
Do you want to finish off with a hopeful positive?
Well, I myself, I am very excited because I would say the big challenge for music is that everybody understands music. Most musical understanding is intuitive understanding. So you learn a style of music by imitating someone else. And I think one of the things that's been hard about the 20th century is you either have to find a style that truly captures you, jazz or rock, or whatever, traditional folk music, and just learn by imitation, or you have to sort of figure out a musical language of your own. But I feel like in the last few years, I have developed a much more reliable understanding of how music works. And so, I will be happy spending the rest of my life making music and putting that understanding into practice. I feel like I wrote it all out in this gigantic book I just published. And so now, having published that, my job is to really internalize it in my body and in my practice. So I feel optimistic for myself personally. I think I will be happy doing that. I just hope that when historians look back at this time, that there's the old saying about fiddling while Rome burns. I just hope that's not how people think of me.
Well, thank you so much, Dmitri.
Thank you for having me. Likewise.